so much for joining us bright and early. My name's Anna Palmer. I'm the CEO and one of the founders of Punchbowl News. We are very excited to have this conversation, a pop-up conversation with Senator Mike Rounds, the Republican from South Dakota, and Mark Kelly, the Democrat from Arizona. I'm going to be joined on stage this morning, sharing moderating duty with senior congressional reporter Andrew Desiderio as we talk about news of the day and the continued development of space policy. A big thank you to the United Launch Alliance for partnering with us and making this event possible. After our first conversation, I'm going to be joined on stage by Tori Bruno, President and CEO of the United Launch Alliance, for a fireside chat. As always, you can find Punchbowl News on all social media platforms at Punchbowl News, and we encourage you to share about this conversation. With that, I'll welcome Andrew and the senators to the stage. All right, senators, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, we are going to start with some news of the day, questions, and then we'll get into space policy. There is no shortage of questions about what's going to happen as we close out this week in the Senate. Senator Kelly, you said you were opposed to the House-passed CR. Are Democrats prepared to hold the line and shut down the government if they don't get a vote on the alternative 28-day CR?
Well, I mean, looking at, first of all, how did we get here, right? We've had appropriators in the United States Senate working on real appropriations bills for a good period of time now. They're really close on getting these complete. Yeah. There are some agreements, a little bit more work left to be done. They could be finished maybe in about a month. So there is an option to do a 1-month CR. And I think we should get agreement on that. And by the way, CRs are usually done in a bipartisan way. Democrats and Republicans working together in the House, working together in the Senate. That is not this. Mm-hmm. This was the House Republicans just working with the White House to come up with a plan that has some really bad things in it for the American people. So that's the challenge we face. Shutting down the government's bad. This year-long CR or CR that goes to September, it's really bad too. So we find ourselves in the spot, and the best way out of it is to do what we normally do, which is a bipartisan effort to get the appropriations done, get them across the finish line. Most of this stuff has already been agreed to.
Senator Rounds, as of a few weeks ago, a lot of Republicans, including yourself, defense hawks, especially appropriators, were also saying that a short-term CR might be the best way out of this as well. What do you think changed over the last few weeks? And secondly, would you be in favor of giving Democrats an amendment vote on that short-term CR in exchange for a time agreement, which you would need in order to pass this by tomorrow night?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for the opportunity. And I think you'll find that in many of the discussions we have, Mark and I are not very far apart on some of the stuff that we would like to see get done. A number of us would have liked to have seen the 12 appropriation bills come all the way through in regular order. 11 of the 12 were all done last July, and they never hit the floor once during the entire 6 months after that. And so here we come with a new administration now. We were in a CR when we got to the new administration. And during this time, I've joined the Appropriations Committee now. I know there's been ongoing discussions about trying to get the 12 appropriation bills across as a package. Simply haven't gotten to the point where it's agreed to yet. In the meantime, the House has looked at this thing and said, we're going to get something done, a consideration. And we thought they might very well consider a 30-day extension. They decided not to. They decided they wanted to get it done, get it out of the way, and go to work on next year's appropriation bills, which, by the way, we should already have started. And so I think the consensus that was made by the leadership team was, let's get this thing done. Let's do a continuing resolution based upon, and I think their thought was, the vast majority of this had already been voted on once because it's based on 2-year-ago stuff that our Democratic colleagues had already voted affirmatively on. And so they thought this would be a good way to continue on, get it done, and move on to the next appropriation bill. There's a number of us, as Mark has indicated, thought that the best way to do it would be to take a 30-day break, get it done before April actually use the 12 appropriation bills to finish it out. But right now we're out of time. The only vehicle we have available right now is the one that the House did send over to us, and then they left town. And so, yeah, we will need 60 votes in order to pass it. We will need Democrat support in order to get past this shutdown period. Would it be better if we had a consensus where you could get, 90 votes in favor of doing something like that? Sure. Unfortunately, today we're probably not going to get it, and it's going to be a matter of the negotiations between leadership as to what it's going to take to come around to the point where we can get 60 votes. But I don't see another vehicle out there right now, and I'm afraid that we're stuck with either the continuation until the end of the year with an agreement that we get this year's appropriation bills on the floor, moving through and in regular order.
But the difference this time is Mike Rounds is on the appropriations committee. I have great confidence in him that he can push this through. And by the way, I'm looking at, Reagan Airport right over there, right across the Potomac.
The jet fumes are coming,
It does not take long for anybody in the country to get back to that airport.
That's right.
Real quick, Senators, if I may, you've both been longtime supporters of Ukraine. Senator Kelly, you were in Ukraine over the weekend. I'm wondering if you could share some reflections quickly on your conversations in Ukraine this past weekend, how they're feeling about the president's posture toward Ukraine and Russia right now, how they're feeling about a potential diplomatic agreement with Russia, and just within the last hour or so, the Russians basically rejected this proposed ceasefire from Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, and the last thing, I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
They're a bunch of thugs and war criminals. I heard that firsthand from many Ukrainians, particularly a couple nurses that I met in a veterans hospital that watched children that they knew being raped by Russians in front of their parents, and then those children were murdered in front of their parents. These folks should be rotten in prison somewhere, including the Russian president. You asked me about the reaction to the change in the Trump administration policy. One of these veterans was a guy named Anton, who is now a triple amputee. So he's missing one arm, a hand, a leg, blinded in both eyes. He still has scars all over him that aren't healed yet from a first-person drone attack. And I was speaking to him through a translator mostly, and then I asked him, what does he think about this change in policy recently, meaning that stopping the intelligence and the security assistance, the weapons being transferred. And in English, he said to me, what the fuck? And I think that kind of summed up the attitude of many of the Ukrainians. We've been with them. They're a democracy. They're an ally. I know if we stick with them, they will be with us through anything we might face in the future. Very experienced. It's amazing how they are innovating in their defense, system. The cycle of getting new stuff out to the front lines. They're fighting for their survival, literally. And the Russians, as you can see from the reaction to this ceasefire, there was no, well, let's continue to talk about it. They're just no. They want to take over this country, and I'm convinced if they walk away from this, when this ends, if Putin thinks he was successful in any way, you just watch out, because he's probably going to go to a Baltic nation next, or maybe Poland. He's not going to stop. He wants to put back together the Soviet Empire.
We have one last quick question, then we are going to talk about space policy, the topic of the day, but I do want to ask you, Senator Rounds, DOGE. There has been a lot of coverage about how this administration is looking to slash spending, jobs. On Wednesday, they announced half of the education department employees are being laid off. Do you have any concerns about how this is being handled?
I think we start with the premise that we've never had a president before that wanted to actually reduce the size of the executive branch of government. So for most of us, we look at it, and if you talk to the folks back home, they'll say it's about time somebody started reducing the size of the federal bureaucracy. Most of us would do it with a little more surgical precision. What has happened is the president's team has said there is so much out there that they're going to start out by shutting everything down, and then where the loudest squeals come are the places they're going to go back in and fix. And when you do it that way, yeah, you can have a lot of progress in a short period of time, but there are also some damages that occur. And when that happens, you've got to be able to fix them. So as I say, this is not the way that most of us would do it who have been actively involved, but nonetheless, this is the first time we've ever had a president who actually wanted to reduce the size. So on our part, we've looked at it and said wherever we find something that needs to be repaired, we're going to do our best to try to get the repairs made. One example that I've used is that there was an NIH, when they went in and they shut it down, one of the websites that they used was where the protocols for cancer research and the experimental work that was doing with some cancer patients, the protocols were set out on a day-to-day basis. One of the nurses had contacted us and said, my website is shut down. I don't know what the protocols are that I'm supposed to be using for my cancer treatments. And we got it repaired, but it took a couple days to do so. So have they been breaking some things along the way? Yes. We talked to Elon Musk about it in our closed session, and we explained it to him very clearly that, look, we get it, we understand what the president's trying to do here, but you're breaking some things. And his first response was, this is my cell number. When you find something like that, text me. And a number of us said, you don't have enough time in the day to take all of our text messages. And he agreed that he would add another person specifically for this purpose.
Can I get that number?
So I've
Me too.
actually given it to some of your colleagues already. Yeah.
I'd love to have it.
And so with the purpose that when we find these things, we fix them.
Yeah.
And so far, my team has been able to work through regular channels to get a number of these issues fixed. But yeah, look, you talk to the American people on this thing here, they're saying, look, somebody has to do something, and we can't continue on with the expenditures that we've got. What we're going to try to do is to make sure that anecdotally there aren't things out there that could stop it in its tracks because of unintended consequences. So we're going to try to be part of the team, but we're also going to try to fix those areas that need to be fixed. And then let me just, one thing that I have to say this. What Mark just said with regard to Ukraine, look, he's right. Putin is the instigator. Russia is the aggressor. If they are successful or consider themselves successful here, they will do other things. I get the reason why the president wants to try to fix this. He hates the idea of people dying on a battlefield. He hates the idea of what we see in war on the impact on civilians. If he's going to be the mediator in the middle, I understand he's bringing people to the table, but perhaps the most recent information today was that Russia had said, this is not going to happen. We're not there. But our negotiators are just now getting there, and this may very well have been their opening salvo before they start to negotiate, hopefully. In the meantime, yeah, look, we're dealing with people that are just simply not honorable individuals, and we get it. And if we can fix something here, if we can get to a ceasefire, that would be at least an opportunity. But nonetheless, Ukraine is the good guy in this particular case, and they should be our ally.
All right, transitioning to topic of the day, space policy. We're very lucky to have two men on stage here who are both pilots. One of you is a former astronaut who has been to space, of course.
That's not me.
Senator Kelly. And both of you serve together on the Armed Services and Intelligence Committees, so you've got a pretty broad jurisdiction when it comes to all of the national security issues surrounding this. We wanted to start off with asking you, Senator Rounds, about President Trump's executive order to establish a so-called Golden Dome system, missile defense system for the United States, similar to what Israel has, the Iron Dome, of course, but on a much larger scale. This would obviously require space constellations, elements that have to be considered as part of what the Pentagon's doing with Space Force as well, which is going to have an integral role in the development of this. Senator Rounds, can you talk a little bit about why this is a necessary effort and whether you think it's actually achievable?
Yeah, look, the world is not a safe place. And today we fight in 5 different domains: air, land, sea, space, and cyberspace. Golden Dome approach on this is to recognize that our adversaries are gotten very, very good at, they have nuclear capabilities, and they're continuing to grow their nuclear capabilities. They have very good capabilities with regard to stealth. They have very good capabilities with regard to space capabilities. Their cyber teams are very good. And we know that they're being aggressive. China in particular not only has significantly increased their nuclear capabilities, but their space capabilities as well. They also have worked very, very hard at hypersonic weapons, and there's no stopping right now in terms of their advancements moving forward. They clearly are not doing this for defensive purposes. These are aggressive moves that they are making. So when we start talking about that, the last thing in the world we want is to have one of our communities, whether it be on the coast or in the coast, actually be subject to one of these hypersonic attacks or an ICBM attack. You have to have space-based assets to be able to identify the incoming stuff in some cases, but you've also got to have radars on the ground. When we talk about a dome, it sounds like it's one system. It's really a whole series of systems, whether you're talking space-based assets that are able to detect, and you're talking about land-based radars and so forth that can detect certain items as well. It's a layered series of defensive capabilities. Iron Dome, when you're talking about in Israel, it's not just one system. It is a whole series of 3 different types of systems to protect against different types of attacks. The same thing is what we're talking about here. When we say a dome, it's really a whole series of defensive capabilities to protect against a whole series of different attacks, whether you're talking about cruise missiles or ICBMs.
Can I comment?
Yeah, please.
So, in theory, the idea sounds right. We would be protected from incoming ballistic missiles, hypersonic cruise missiles. This is something Ronald Reagan proposed in the 1980s with Star Wars. Mm-hmm. We do have a system now. We have a very rather limited ballistic missile defense system with interceptors in certain parts of the country. Always have to wonder like what part of this is in the open source, but you could imagine where we would put them there to defend from rogue nations, primarily North Korea. They don't work great. I think if we had a North Korean ballistic missile coming our way, there's a chance we could shoot it down. So we have a system already. Difference between us and Israel, Israel's the size of New Jersey. To protect the entire United States, it would be a considerable effort. You're talking about hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars. So then we have to figure out what the priorities are. Do we want to rebuild our shipbuilding industry, which is a very, very high priority of mine? Do we want to fund the next generation air dominance fighter for the Air Force and FA-XX, which is the 6th generation fighter for the Navy? What are we going to do about Sentinel, which is the replacement for Minuteman, our ICBMs, one leg of our nuclear triad? So in theory, it sounds great. I would love to like snap my fingers and we would have this magnificent system. But then there's also the other considerations, which is how do our adversaries react to us now having a defensive system that looks like it's going to work really well? So what you might expect is that they would work harder to penetrate our system. There was a time when Russia had a lot more than 5,500 nuclear warheads, upwards of like 20 or 30,000. We had that many as well. I would expect an adversary's response would be to just start cranking out pits, cranking out ICBMs. Mike mentioned hypersonics. One change we're seeing is what's called a hypersonic glide vehicle. You can think of hypersonics in 2 different ways. A missile that goes above Mach 5, but also the glide vehicle that can maneuver at hypersonic speeds, which presents significant challenges for an interceptor, for our early warning system. You could come in from a direction that is different than we would normally expect. And when you can glide at a hypersonic speed, you can create tremendous cross-range and downrange changes. So it's not a ballistic entry. Now this thing can fly to a certain target. So this stuff would get harder. So in theory, I'm not opposed to the idea of having a system like this, but it's not just, the idea pops into one guy's head and we should just suddenly spend hundreds of billions of dollars on it, right? We should really think through what this means for nuclear proliferation and for our own safety. Is this going to make us safer? It might. It also might not.
I want to drill down on that, though. So how else can the U.S. leverage the space domain to keep foreign adversaries like China and Russia, as you mentioned, in check?
Well, it is the high ground. It literally is. You hear in ground combat often, you got to maintain the high ground. It's easier to be putting your kinetic operation down with gravity. Think of space as the new high ground. And we're going to see a proliferation of space-based weapons. It's already happening. We've got sensors in space. The Russians want to take those out. The Chinese want to take them out. They're going to put anti-satellite weapons into space. So these capabilities are being developed and in some cases deployed. When I was my third flight in space, the Chinese shot down their own satellite in a test, in an anti-satellite test. I then had to maneuver the space station and space shuttle out of the way of a piece of Chinese space junk created by this test. Cyber in space is going to become a big part of how we operate. We're actually talking specifically about this yesterday, about how that is going to work and what we're capable of now and what we might be capable of in the future.
Yeah, look, this is not going to go away, and it's a combination of what our capabilities are in space and in the cyber world, and how do you communicate it, how do you control it, and then how do you detect what they're doing? Where does stealth fit into space operations? And what about when our adversaries think seriously about deploying weapons in space to take out our systems so that we can't see them? Now, what does that do for stability in the world? And so I think this is the reason why when we talk about being able to defend against the possible adversaries, we know that this would not be a perfect system, but to make it the possibility that their most capable weapons might not work at least gives us the first chance to perhaps deter an attack. The second part of it naturally is and it has worked now, for what? Well, since the 1940s, is to be able to deter, which means that we've got to have weapon systems that they fear as well. And their defensive capabilities have improved. And what we've got to be able to do is to have systems that they still fear. And as long as diplomacy is still our first step, and we try to settle our differences through diplomatic means, it's a whole lot easier to have a diplomatic outcome if they believe very seriously that you have the capability of causing great harm should it come to that. And so you have to have a strong defensive capability and offensive capability. But diplomacy is still a critical part of this discussion that we sometimes forget to bring into play.
Senator Rounds, we definitely want to get to cyber as well. That's a big focus of yours. You're the chairman of the Armed Services Subcommittee on Cybersecurity. But first, Senator Kelly, I wanted to ask you on this topic. You are the original author of what's called the Launch Act, which is essentially designed to cut red tape, make it easier bureaucratically for commercial space licensing, things like that. How does that factor in trying to make the U.S. Making the U.S. more competitive with the Chinese and the Russians?
Yeah, so to get a permit from the federal government, from the FAA for a launch or reentry, that's part of this too. There's a process that we take companies through. It often takes too long. It's not efficient. I'll tell you one thing that doesn't help is just like randomly firing a bunch of people from the federal government isn't going to make this thing go smoother. But it needs to be more efficient. We've got so many companies out there that have capacity to do more, whether it's ULA or SpaceX, or we've got Blue Origin with their New Glenn rocket that successfully flew recently. So we're developing the capacity, and we need that. Space is becoming a very commercially viable environment. So we need reforms in the system. So the Launch Act does that. It's permitting reform for launch permits and reentry permits. Now, saying that we need reform, we also have to factor in that the primary reason we do this permitting is to protect the public. There's a much higher standard to protecting the public than, let's say, protecting me, the guy that's sitting at the top of the rocket. I'm kind of expendable. You do not want a rocket part to land on a school in Florida. That would be a disaster. So we've got to do this in a way that's smart and efficient. The Launch Act addresses that. It also addresses like the sensing, remote sensing from space through the Department of Commerce. So it touches both the FAA and Department of Commerce. And if we can get this through, this would be great for the industry. And it'll just continue to help accelerate commerce in space.
All right, we are quickly going to get the hook here, but Senator Rounds, I wanted to talk to you, kind of following up on what Andrew was talking about, cybersecurity. You've chaired the Armed Services Subcommittee on Cybersecurity. You've gone deep in that area for a number of years, and last year, included in the NDA, was a provision in the legislation that would require the Pentagon to develop a roadmap for addressing cyber warfare in space. What are some of the areas that you want to be addressed there?
When you talk about cybersecurity, you're talking about two different types. You're talking about your offensive and your defensive cyber capabilities. When we talk about the connection between our activity in space and what we're doing here, it's command and control. How do you control the assets? How do you be able to observe what's going on? A lot of that communication, digital in nature, it's all digital in nature, but you've got to be able to have access to it. You've got to be able to protect those cyber communications. Along with that coordinated effort, what it does, it's integrating what is all of the domains, air, land, sea, space, and cyberspace. Any activity that we see from our adversaries, in many cases right now, the warning is when we start to see a pickup on our cyber activity, the cyber attacks. In the United States today, the first attacks that come against us will be cyber. And the attempt will be to dislodge or to limit our ability to respond, to be able to communicate with one another. In the Department of Defense Internet system and so forth, you have to be able to protect against incoming, and you have to be able to as well make sure that you can go out and damage their systems as well. So it's both the offensive and defensive sides of this. And let me just say, we don't have near the size of a cyber force. We actually have basically a new program coming in, which has been endorsed by this administration, in which it's an advancement in terms of how we train the individuals, how we keep them trained, how we keep them basically up to speed, giving them the best tools available and so forth. But there's one last piece of this that I think we've got to just touch on. That is we'll never have enough people to compete with China with regard to the number of people working on it. We have to use artificial intelligence in the deployment of both our offensive and defensive cyber capabilities. We're in the middle of that right now. AI is here, it's for real, it's not going away. We want to make sure that we develop it here and that we apply it here. And I think that application of AI as an accelerator into our offensive and defensive cyber capabilities is critical. It's being done now. Our adversaries are trying to do the same thing. But it is an advancement just in terms of the speed in which we're going to have to respond in the future. So, yeah, I mean, it's there. It's not going away. It is integrated into all of the domains, both offensively and defensively. And it's right now, I think, in the Senate, I think we've got really good bipartisan support for what we're trying to get done, both with regards to AI development and our cyber developments as well.
And to do that, we need semiconductor chips. That's why the Chips and Science Act was so critical to build that capacity here in the United States, so we don't have to rely on chips across the Pacific Ocean at TSMC. They're building it in Arizona, but also Samsung in Texas. Intel is expanding their capacity. We need to develop that here. There was a big announcement at the White House just last week about TSMC, another $100 billion investment. We got to make sure that this goes smoothly and we don't wind up with any bumps in the road, because we need those semiconductor chips to build the AI capacity that Mike was talking about.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Senators, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Good to see you all.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks so much, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Senator.
All right, now I'd like to welcome Tori Bruno, President and CEO of the United Launch Alliance, for a fireside chat. thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thrilled to be here.
All right, so first things first, for anyone who's here who doesn't know, give us the kind of elevator pitch. What is the United Launch Alliance?
We're one of the country's 3 heavy launch providers, which means we build rockets, giant rockets. We take all of these payloads to space. We touch your life every single day. The weather, the GPS, national security. Our role within that marketplace is really specific to national security. Our vehicles and the vehicle I've just finished developing are really directed at that, the exotic orbits that only the government flies. And I did that because all of the growth in space that you're seeing now is in the commercial LEO marketplace for commercial internet. And that's great, but there are still these exotic missions. No one else has developed a rocket for those, and I could not leave that abandoned. So here we are.
And what is your background, just a little bit?
Yeah, I'm a rocket scientist.
You actually get to say that. Most people say, I'm not a rocket scientist, but.
Yeah, no, I've been developing rockets my entire life. I've done over 3 dozen systems. I also have a very deep background in nuclear weapons, in strategic deterrence, and missile defense.
Well, that is a good place for us to start. We spoke with the senators about the Golden Dome of America. President Trump signed, of course, an executive order in January to develop this next generation homeland missile defense shield. What are your thoughts on Trump's plan?
Yeah, absolutely. It's about time. I can tell you as a missile defender and as a person who, as I said, developed strategic systems, that the threat to the United States from ballistic missiles and hypersonic weapons has been growing steadily over the last 15 years, and the threshold for nuclear weapons proliferation has gotten lower. We have the ability to do this. That's the good news. We have all the tools that are necessary. We have all the systems either already designed and developed or in development right now. We just need more of them, and we need them deployed in a way that's the ideal architecture.
So it's a complex system, right? I mean, that's what we heard a lot about.
It is, and the senators did a good job. And I think the one thing I would part with my respected senator from Arizona is that Strategic Defense Initiative, which he referred to, was for a different thing. It was for Russia. It was part of defeating the Soviet Union, and it did its job. He kind of got that a little bit wrong. They started with 20,000 warheads, but because of the Strategic Defense Initiative, they drove towards 60,000. It broke their economy, and that was a large part of winning the Cold War. This is something else. This is an environment where lots of countries have ballistic missiles, and several have hypersonics. Okay. And many of them are going to have, if they do not already, nuclear weapons. And we can deal with that now, and we can have a framework in place literally within this administration. And it is a layered defense. That was a correct description. So today, we have the ground-based mid-course system based primarily in Fort Greely, Alaska, and that was correct. It is primarily for North Korea. We already have the improved upgrade system to that in development right now. It's called NGI, Next Generation Interceptor. We need to finish that, and we need to deploy it, but not just for North Korea anymore, in Alaska, but also in the Northeast and likely in the South, because as Senator Kelly alluded to, there are novel trajectories that come around the South Pole. That is our ICBM killer. Underneath that, we would put a regional defense network of THAAD batteries, a system I personally developed, that would help us manage the magazine depth that would be placed, or the stress on that would be placed on NGI and GMD. It's a very capable system, and it works in different phenomenology. The first one is only outside the atmosphere, what we call an exosystem. That operates in both regimes, which has a unique ability to strip out decoys as they enter the atmosphere. That's why. And you put them right next to a city, because even THAAD is an ICBM killer. It just gets a very much smaller defended area. Next element, Aegis on both coasts, probably in the Gulf. Another great system based on Standard Missile 2 and 3. And then our SBIRS, Missile Warning Tracking System, would do our missile warning and missile tracking. So we got all the pieces. 2 of the 3 are already in production, as well as that satellite. The only thing we're lacking is hypersonics. And Mark did a good job explaining the nature of that. It's maneuvering hypersonics that are the problem. All of these missile threats are hypersonic. What's unique about that is when we defend against a ballistic missile threat with an interceptor, we're using a rocket to shoot another rocket, because these are the fastest things we have.
Right.
And the problem with the hypersonic gliders is when you're doing it normally, it's like shooting clay pigeons on the trap range. Here comes the incoming warhead, you shoot in front of it, and you intersect and you kill it. If they wait until you shoot and they maneuver, you'll miss. So you needed something faster than a rocket to intercept it. The way we do it, the only way we can do it, is from space with directed energy, because that's a speed of light round, and we can start that program in development right now.
All right, you explained that very well from all the different layers.
That's the whole architecture.
I appreciate that. I do not spend my day job going deep on this, so I learned a little bit there as well. But let's look forward, the next frontier when it comes to technology and innovation. We heard the senators talk about cyber warfare, AI.
Yeah.
What do you think the U.S. should be focused on, and how can that become a reality?
Space. So space will be attacked kinetically, and it will also be attacked with cyber. And I think we need to think about it in a different way, because today we only got half a strategy. We recognize that space is important to us, and we think that, well, wouldn't it be awful if a terrestrial conflict, say over the Taiwan Straits, extended into space? That's wrong. We have the most powerful terrestrial military in the world. It is daunting to China. It is daunting to Russia and any other adversary. It is no longer, however, a force multiplier, space is. It's now absolutely essential. A conflict will start in space. It won't escalate to space, so that China can level the playing field. And the half strategy we have today is based entirely on resiliency and primarily in low Earth orbit, by proliferating our assets and distributing them. And the idea being is that, hey, you know, we'll get attacked, and we could absorb some hits in those constellations, and we can keep doing our job. That's important. But that's only good for the first few hours of the attack. And then the attacker will overwhelm you. And you also need to recognize how accessible LEO is from Earth, and how vulnerable proliferated networks are to cascade effects within their constellations. This has to be a layered defense in terms of resiliency in multiple orbital regimes that is much harder to address simultaneously. And then the entirely missing other half, you got to fight back. You have to actively protect these assets. Counterforce is required, or else they'll just overwhelm you in a few hours. That system needs to get well thought out and into development now.
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about warfighting in space, right, what advice would you have for the Trump administration, especially as it relates to, as you mentioned, China, Russia? We've heard those two as, you know, kind of a common enemy.
Build a complete architecture and a complete solution like we just discussed. What our mission is to make them hesitate. There's a clock ticking on Xi Jinping. He's made commitments to recover Taiwan. He's not going to do it peacefully. The Hong Kong option's not available. So they're thinking seriously about doing it by force. And the clock for them is, you know, 27, 2028, that kind of time window. All we need to do is to delay that long enough, because we have an opportunity, and it's a fleeting opportunity. China is heading into a long-term period of economic stress. While we're a little bit daunted by the volume of space activity that they have going on, the good news is it's very inefficient. You know, we do in this country, with the 2 heavy launch vehicles we have in literally really only 2 major launch sites, what it takes them 14 vehicles and a dozen launch sites to get done. And the capabilities they put in space are less than what we're able to field. Long-term period of economic stress, you can't afford all that. It's brittle. We just got to hold them off for about 10 years, and they're done. Their window closes economically for Taiwan, and we move on to whatever the next phase is.
The next frontier, as it were. You spoke kind of at the beginning, kind of the role of ULA. You launch rockets for the national security space customer. How does that play into this broader conversation about commercial space and kind of the overall defense that we're speaking about?
Yeah, well, it's a narrow highway to space. There's 2 roads right now, soon to be 3, and that's about it. The one thing I would like to see us as a nation relative to national security do a better job thinking through is how lift contributes. You know, it's been very transactional all these decades. You know, the launch vehicle takes the very sophisticated, you know, eye-watering technology national security space satellite to a location, and we put it there. There is so much more that can be leveraged through launch. We can obfuscate what it is. We can make it difficult to figure out where it went. We can move it in orbit once it is there. We really need to be thinking about launch and the space assets together as one system, because launch can do things that a satellite can't.
Right.
Satellites are all about their payload. They don't have much energy. They don't move very fast. Just kind of float up there in space. And rockets are so much more powerful, so much faster, big orbital changes.
All right, Tori, we are almost out of time, but if there was one thing that the people in the room, streaming, the advocates in this space would take away from this conversation, what would it be?
Now is the time. We can do the Golden Dome. We need to. The threat environment is completely different than it was, and thank God we got all the tools in our hand right now. We can have this very quickly.
All right, we are going to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining me
My
this
pleasure.
morning. A big thank you to the United Launch Alliance for partnering with us, and to the senators for joining us this morning. You can check out more Punchbowl News events at punchbowl.news. Have a great day and stay safe, everybody.